everyone, welcome to this episode of Everything Dog Training. I'm John McGuigan. I'm a dog trainer and behaviour consultant working and living in Glasgow in Scotland, and I have thousands of hours working with people and their dogs coming up with positive reinforcement based solutions for their training and behaviour problems. I offer a variety of products. You can do one-to-one training with me in person. We've got people travelling from lots of different places. I've had people coming visiting from the continental Europe. So somebody's come from before they were travelling from the Netherlands, and they stopped by to do some work with their dog while they were travelling. And I've got somebody coming from Austria soon who are visiting. And last year also had a trainer who visited and was visiting Europe and stopped by Scotland purposely for the sole reason of coming out and shadowing with me. So hi Martine, and I'll be seeing Martine next month when we go to Australia to do a couple of seminars. So if you like my stuff, there's always the option of travelling, and I know it's hard because it can be expensive, but I've had people from England and further up north in Scotland making 3 and 4 hour trips to come and see me. If you're not available, we've got a variety of online options, and I'll put a link to all of our courses, the training platform, in the show notes. And we're also available for Zoom consultations, so we can do remote consultations, and I've done several, and I've also had several come through the podcast. So people have listened to the podcast, liked what I've heard, liked what they've seen on my socials, and then come to us for training and some remote assistance. Today I just troubleshoot through a women's training programme, and we worked through a few things with her and her dog. It was a really interesting and quite a challenging session for me to be to be creative with some of the things that we came up with. And it's a conversation that we're having, so we want solutions that both you and your dog are comfortable with doing. Yeah, so that's what I can offer you. And if you want to support the channel, then you can buy one of my courses. As I said, the link's there. Offer affordable courses from how to get your dog to come back walking a loose lead and pay more attention to you, and a variety of things. We've got our online membership, which we're just now we're revamping, and it will be re-released again towards the end of the year. So please look out for that. And if you want to support me in non-financial ways, if you can leave a review for me, comment if you're able to on the podcast itself. I think you can leave comments on Spotify. You can certainly leave them on YouTube, and several of you have left comments on YouTube for me, so I really appreciate that. And you can follow me, like and share my stuff on socials on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube at Glasgow Dog Trainer. You can also email me info@glasgowdogtrainer.co.uk, and I do like getting emails about the podcast. It lets us know that I'm not just speaking into the void. Yeah, so that's that stuff. Okay, and today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the XL Bully today and the problem with breed-specific legislation. I don't know, in fact, I do know, I don't have any solutions to this problem. I've got some utopian solutions, which a lot of people do, and I'm going to go through several of those. But I wanted today just to give us an overview of kind of how certain aspects of law work. I was a police officer here for 18 years. How the council works, how our local councils work, the powers that the dog warden has and doesn't have, the resources the police have and don't have, and maybe some stuff about government, but we're going to look at a few different things with that. This is it's a challenging topic because it's so emotive for people. One thing that we can say is we brought breed-specific legislation in under the Dangerous Dogs Act in 1991 after a number of high-profile dog fatalities. And as far as I was aware at that time, none of those were involving pit bulls. There was a really, I don't want to mention it because there was an incident which happened which was not there was 4 breeds that were banned: Pit Bull Terrier or Pit Bull Type, Japanese Tosa, and there was only one that was in the country at that time, the Doggo Argentino, so there was none in the country in 1991, and the Fila Brasileira. So those are the other two dogs which were banned. And it was almost as if the government just took the big book of dogs off the wall or off the bookshelf and went through and looked at a couple of dogs and said, that one, and that one. Okay, so we had a lot of pit bulls or pit bull types in the country at the time, and we still do. We still do. We still do have a lot of these types of dogs. In Scotland, we are fortunate that we don't have very many instances. The society is slightly different in Scotland, and I often try to wonder why it's different from in Scotland and in England. But it is similar in some aspects, but it is quite different in others. My cousin was a procurator fiscal, that's the state prosecutor, and I think he said up until a couple of years ago, certainly, there had only been one prosecution for somebody having a pit bull type. This was prior to all the XL bully stuff. One prosecution for having a pit bull type in the previous 5 or 7 years, and that was following another incident where this type of dog had bitten somebody. So the police in Scotland aren't out looking for for pit bulls at the time. That has changed, and it has changed quite dramatically because of all this stuff. Now, the other thing that happens is that it's news. These things are news. When a dog attacks and kills someone, it's a sensationalist. It's sensationalism. Sorry, it's not sensationalism. It's sensational. Okay, it hits the headlines because it's so rare, and then there's hysteria, and the media play their part in that, in ramping everybody up and calling these dogs devil dogs and all these kind of things. So we brought the legislation in 1991, and it has done nothing to curb dog fatalities. And every time there's a fatality, we have this discussion, and it happens online, and it's quite similar to what happens in the US regarding mass murders with firearms. I think that we've had, and again, I just want to be sensitive about this, we had a mass shooting in 1987 in the UK at Hungerford, where a man who had legally owned firearms, self-repeating rifles or self-loading rifles, went out and killed a bunch of people, and it was in the double figures. Immediately after that, Margaret Thatcher, who was right-wing by anybody's account, the next day went into Parliament and banned the ownership of assault rifles, and they were already under really strict control anyway. So she basically said, if you can't play with your toys properly, which is what they are, certainly that's what they were in the UK. I know it's slightly different in America because the crime rate is so high. The number of firearms is so high, and the crime rate is not as high as people think that it is. Okay, and again, that's down to the media terrifying people. Most people live safe lives most of the time. But anyway, Margaret Thatcher took people's guns away from them, took their toys away from them, and then we had Dunblane, the Dunblane massacre in Dunblane's not far from here. It's only about half an hour or 40 minutes from where I live, where somebody went in, a madman went in with a legally owned handgun and killed 16 or 17 children who were 5 and 6 years old. And immediately after that, Tony Blair or Gordon Brown at the time, banned the ownership of handguns. It can be done, okay. So, but anyway, it's similar. It is similar to the legislation. Similar. There's some parallels, but they're not entirely the same. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to look at what I want to do. I don't want to go into case by case detail on this. I just wanted to talk about overall things of the numbers. We'll look a little bit about stats. I'm not going to bore you to death with stats, but statistics are important. So if we look at, just as an example, there's around 1,600 road fatalities last year in the UK. Now that's either in England and Wales or in the UK, all right, but it won't be that much more than that. Scotland's only 5% or less than 5% of the population of the UK, so we could put another 10%. We could put another 10% on top of that, which would bring it up to about 1,700 if that 1,600 isn't for the UK. So 1,600 road fatalities. Okay, so the roads, even with our strict control of speed limits, drink driving and policing the manner in which people drive, we still have 1,600 road fatalities. But we have 65 million people in the UK, and we have millions of cars, and cars drive at 70 miles an hour along the motorway. Okay, they're lethal. Okay, and that's why we have licensing of who can drive them and so on. Okay, now we look at the number of homicides. Homicide is both murder and culpable homicide. So basically, the homicide of the death of one person at another's hand. We had 590 in 2023, 590, and we had 686 the year before that. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the figures that we were looking at for homicide and road crashes. Okay, road fatalities. Okay, now that's 1,600. I wonder if I was to ask you how many fatalities that there are with dogs, what number you would come up with last year. Okay, and the number was 16. 16 fatalities in 2023 from dogs. So that's 1,000 times less. 1,000 times less than there are with the roads. Okay, with vehicles on the road. 1,000 times less. So that's the problem that we're talking about. Okay, 16 fatalities. Now that I think, as far as I can see, the stats are kind of be difficult to look at. That's double what it was the year before, right? I'm not laughing, okay, but it's double. Now, I'm not laughing because I'm laughing at it because it's a ridiculous statistic. Okay, something happened there. Now, out of those 16 fatalities, half of them have been identified as XL bullies or XL bully crosses. So although the number of those 16 is statistically small with the population, the number of XL bullies involved in these deaths is statistically high. Okay, sitting at 50% or thereabouts. Okay, now that is an issue. That in and of itself, is statistically important. And statistics are important because they allow us to make sense of things. Now, the flip side of that is, well, in fact, it's not the flip side. If we look at, I think it's been 8 in 2023, and forgive me if those numbers are wrong. Okay, if we've had 8 in 2023 and 16 in 8 in 22 and 16 in 23, that's 100% increase. Okay, 100% increase, and that's statistically important as well. All right. However, when we look at, going back to the original point I'm making about the 16, when the numbers are that small, so we could have a 1,000% increase, and people go, that's massive. Yeah, if the original number has been 1 and we're now sitting at 10, it's maybe not. Okay, so these statistics are important to have some understanding of them. Now, XL bullies also look impressive, intimidating, scary, whatever word that you want to use for that, but that's part of their appeal by people. People like these dogs because of the way that they look. And because of that, because of their visual appearance, that then makes for good headlines. So we slap a picture on the front page of the Daily Mail or the Sun with one of these dogs sneezing, so it's showing its teeth, or barking for a ball, and it makes it look like one of these devil dogs, and then we put some sort of scary high contrast filter over the top of it, and then it starts terrifying people. Okay, so there's a whole bunch going on there in the backdrop. Okay, now I asked this question, what do we do about this? Okay, I asked this a couple of months ago on Facebook, or about 6 weeks ago, and these are some of the questions that came up. Okay, so sorry, some of the points that came up, which I'll cover in just a second. Now, to give you an example, or a couple of examples of how things actually work, and I'm not insulting anybody, but I think a lot of people, when looking at the results, well, we can just do this and just do that. It's not quite as simple as that. And the reason why I talked about those 16 fatalities is because it's not as simple as that, because it's not 16,000. Okay, it's such a rare event. It's so rare that we're not talking these high numbers. Okay, and if we're not talking these high numbers, it's statistically unimportant. Okay, now it's not unimportant, but it's statistically unimportant. And when the government have limited resources or decide to put their money in other places, then you can see how that goes way down the list. Way down the list of their priorities when it's only 16 people in that year. Okay, and then we'll need to see what the stats are for 24. Okay, so when I say statistically unimportant, I mean numbers-wise. It's a drop in the ocean versus the importance that it has to the people that have been killed and their families. Okay, and people's genuine fear of these dogs. All right, so there's a few things going on there. Okay, now, from my time in the police, I'm going to give you an example of this. This will probably make your hair stand on end. We get somebody who is not working or doesn't want to pay their fine, and they're fined at court. Okay, so this is how the law can work. Okay, so say they get given a £500 fine for something, and they don't pay it, or they are unable to pay it. They're then asked to pay it at £10 a week over a year. Okay, so they pay that £500 at £10 a week. Okay, now what will happen is if they don't pay that, then the Crown the Crown goes back to the court and asks for a warrant. Okay, and the warrant is it's called a means warrant. Okay, and basically a means warrant is it arrests the person, brings them to court, and asks them what their means are. So say that they've paid £40 in their original £500 fine and then have lapsed their payments. A means warrant will be issued for £460 or to take them to court. So as a police officer, I would go to the house, they would say, I don't have that money, and we would arrest them and they would go to court the next day. They would then present themselves at court, and the sheriff or the JP, Justice of the Peace, would ask them, how much can you afford? And they'll now say, I can only afford £7 a week. I couldn't afford £10, which is why it lapsed. Okay, can I pay £7 a week? And they'll pay £7 a week over the next 60 or 70 weeks, however long that is. Okay. Now, if they then fail on that, another warrant is issued, and that warrant will then say, so say for talking's sake, they get down to they pay off another £210. So the warrant, what's left on their fine is £250. It's called an extract warrant. Okay, an extract conviction warrant. Now what will happen is that the court will then say you have to pay £250, or it will say, or 7 days, and that's 7 days custody. Okay, so they pay £250 or they spend a week in the jail. Okay, and in Glasgow it's at Barlinnie. Alright, so they get arrested. Now, what can happen with that is, and especially with people who know how to play the system, they then hand themselves in on a Friday morning, okay, or on a Thursday evening. Now, what happens with these sentences is that they're automatically halved. That happens there's a cut-off for it. I don't know what the cut-off is for how long the sentence is, but the lower time-wise, lower duration custodial sentences get reduced in half automatically. Okay, so if you get convicted for 6 months, if you get a 6 month prison sentence, the most that you will serve is 3 months. It's automatically halved. Okay, even though you get a 6 month sentence. All right. If you reoffend within the second 3 months, there's something else that happens, but that's not relevant for what we're talking about. So it automatically gets halved. So it's now 3.5 days, but you can't do a half day in the jail or in prison. So it's now 3 days. Okay. Now, Barlinnie, the prisons certainly used to, they cannot release people on a Saturday or a Sunday. Okay, so day 1 would be the Friday, day 2 would be the Saturday, and day 3 would be the Sunday. Now, they can't release them on a Saturday or Sunday because it's just the way that the system works. And they can't hold them on to Monday because that's now 4 days instead of 3. So what happens is that they present themselves at the office, the police office, and they get taken to Barlinnie and then they get released. Okay, so somebody that can have a £500 fine can pay 20, 30, 40 pounds of that and then not serve any. Now, I the first time I heard this 25 years ago when I started my police career, more than that, God, much more than that, right? 1992, nearly 32 years ago. First time I heard that, I was absolutely appalled, and people don't know that that's what goes on, and that's how aspects of our low-level criminal justice system work. Okay, may have changed. Okay, it's been a long time since I've been in uniform, but it's not that long since I've been out of the police, and I still speak to my colleagues. So those things happen, right? Now the reason why I tell you this is because the people who pay their fines are going to be so if we look at the XL bullies, people who are fined and convicted, they're your law-abiding people, okay, who will adhere to the law and take their punishment, if you like. And then there's that subsect of society who the rules don't apply to them, and I don't want to be horribly snobby about things. Okay, it's just they live beyond the rules of society. Okay, you're kind of low criminal element demographic. All right. So this is how difficult it can be to then start enforcing this stuff. Okay, so that hopefully that's given you some insight into the lower level stuff, which is what we would be talking about if we were to start enforcing, or the police were able to start enforcing this low level legislation. Okay, which is what the Act would be, or the amendments to the Act. Okay, the fines are low level. They're not. People aren't getting 6 years and getting locked up for 6 years for owning a dog, or for having a dog without a muzzle and a lead on in a public place. All right. Now, the other thing with that is then who polices it. So this is one of the things that came up in needs better enforcement. So lots of the suggestions that came up were about the enforcement of the regulations. We have regulations just now. We've got the Control of Dogs Act, okay, and we've got the Dangerous Dogs Act, and these things are still happening. And they happen just now because there's extremely limited resources available in order to police these things. Now, you only need to listen to radio phone-ins, and I speak to my former colleagues, especially the ones that are still working in uniform, and a lot of the time now it's their children who are working in uniform, or the young people, and there's hardly any uniform resources on the street anymore, and that's the first thing. And the second thing is that what they have to spend their time doing, and most of the time, I was shocked by how much time they spend dealing with that. They deal with people in mental health crises. Okay, so they spend a massive proportion of their time dealing with. Okay, welfare checks and so checking that people are still alive if their family are concerned about them for mental health reasons, or people who are in acute mental health episodes. Now, given that the police here, and if you're listening in the US, it's slightly different here. The policing model is not slightly different. The policing model is entirely different in the UK and Commonwealth countries from how it is in the States. It's a much more cooperative, and they talk about policing by consent, which is a subject of another discussion. And I could talk about that if you're interested, but it's not really related to dog training. So the police then have to attend on a community-based level to deal with people with mental health problems, and that's a big time suck. Plus they've got all the other stuff like break-ins and robberies, domestic violence, okay, public order things, and a whole bunch of other things. So you can see how the amount of time available to be having to police dangerous dogs who are not involved in incidents, so just people walking down the street with their dogs, is well off the police's radar. That will be different in some places. Okay, I know in like in London and Birmingham they've got kind of dangerous dog squads and stuff like this. All right, now I have Logan would be observed as being one of these types of dogs. Okay, and I have lived in the city with him for 8 years, and the police have never looked at me once. Okay, and he's been walked around without a muzzle on. Okay, he is not an XL bully. All right. But people on first appearance could think, oh, that's what he is, and the police haven't bothered me with that at all. Okay, and the reason for that is because I look after him and I look after the public. Alright, so that's the policing part of it, about who would enforce it, because the police certainly couldn't unless there was a massive input of money. And for 16 fatalities a year, it's never going to happen. Never, ever, ever going to happen. Okay. So then it goes down to the council. The next level is the council, the dog warden. Okay. So your local community council. They have no powers. No powers. None. Not one. Not a power. Okay. Everything that you do with the dog warden is cooperative. So what will happen is if there's a dog bite, because people don't understand this, then they cooperate with the dog warden, and the dog warden will ask you to go into the dog warden a lot of the time will generally not tell you that they're asking. They are saying that they have the authority of the council behind them, okay, of the state, if you like. Okay, we've got elected representatives, and they've got that authority behind them, but you have to, the person who is subjected to the control order actually has to voluntarily enter into it. And I think that's a thing that people don't understand. They've got no power to, if they say to you they want you to leash and muzzle your dog, they've no power to enforce that. What will happen at that point is they will then report it to the police, okay, and the police have to deal with it. Alright, I'm going to give you an example of this that happened to a friend of mine. A friend of mine was coming in one night from work, and one of his neighbours was hiding in a dark area of the lane. Okay, and I trust my friend, and it was just bizarre behaviour. And his dog jumped up, the two of them got a fright, and the dog jumped up and bit his neighbour in the arm. Okay, the neighbour reported it to the police. The dog warden phoned up initially, and the neighbour said, "Don't know anything about it, I'm not talking to you," and put the phone down. Okay. Dog warden could do nothing about it at that point except report it to the police. Okay, reported it to the police, and the police came to the door, and the person gave a no comment interview, and that was the end of the matter because there was no corroboration for any of it. Okay, one of a client of mine, the dog bit another. That was involved in an incident with the other dog where the other dog their dog bit the other dog, but it was a bit of a skirmish. Okay, and fault at probably 50%. And when the dog warden phoned them up, they said, "I don't have anything to say to you about this," and they put the phone down. And the dog warden has got no authority to detain you, to interview you, to come to your house. Okay, that's law enforcement. That's the police in the UK. The police have to do that. Okay, they have to then go to court, and certainly in Scotland, I know it's slightly different in England because you've got bailiffs and things like that, but they certainly have to go to court for it. Alright. Okay, so that's the background, and that's how difficult enforcement of all these things are. So when people turn around and say we need better enforcement of the legislation, yeah, we absolutely do. There's just no funding for it. It's unfortunate, but there's just no funding for it. And statistically unimportant, of 16 fatalities per year. Okay? Alright. Hopefully you're still with me, and you're still talking to me, and none of you fallen out with me over this, okay? Right, now, a couple of things that came up from when I asked the post about what do we do about this, and somebody had suggested that we have this dog manifesto, where there's a e-learning, an electric learning thing, which is 30 minutes long. You get a qualification or a tick at the box at the end of this, and then there's a prerequisite. This is a prerequisite to rescuing or buying a dog. Okay, yeah, that's great in theory, and I don't mean to sound facetious at all with this. That's good in theory. How do we then enforce that? Every single thing that came up, everything that came up, all great ideas, but how do we enforce that? Okay, now people then say that there's you've now got this qualification, you've passed this qualification in order to you qualify for owning a dog or rescuing a dog. Have you ever done any e-learning package as part of your work? Okay, so you get these things and they come up, you have to do a yearly requalification in first aid or something like that, okay? Or some health and safety practice, or some using a system that you never use. And although it's important, what happens is people study them, and because it's e-learning and it's not done on exam conditions, people study them in order to pass, and as soon as they're passed they then forget about them. So that's the difference with this. That's what would happen with this e-learning package. It gets emailed out, you do your thing, you send it on, and you get a certificate which you can then take to your breeder or your rescue organisation. Now, the big rescue, if this was brought in, the big rescue organisations like the SSPCA, RSPCA, Blue Cross and Dogs Trust would require that. They would, in all likelihood, because they're big. Because can you imagine the scandal if they didn't? Now, smaller rescues who are just looking to get good dogs into good homes with good people are probably going to, maybe, because I don't want to be unfair to anybody, are more likely to play by a little bit faster and looser with those rules. Okay, so that's where this qualification is. In an ideal world, I think every single person who buys a dog should go on a training course before they even get their dog, in order to understand canine body language, how to train positively, how to look after the welfare of their dogs and the welfare of their family and the welfare of society. That's what in an ideal world, I think that's what should happen. But again, the resources to get enough people qualified, well paid enough that they're motivated to provide a service, and on and on and on and on. Okay, so you can see how that becomes difficult. Okay, right. Now, the other thing that was then said was licensing. Okay, licensing. So we bring back a dog license where and it has a compulsory sign up. Yep. Okay, all good in practice. All right. The reason why we did away with the dog license, which was probably in the 80s or 90s in the UK, and the dog license used to buy at your post office, and it was like 37 pence or something like that. And you would buy your dog license. Nobody ever checked that. Nobody ever checked that. Okay. Now, going back to the enforcement of that, so we bring in a license where it's a compulsory sign up. How do we enforce the compulsory nature of it? Okay, so is up to breeders to do that, or up to the rescue organisations to do that? Do they require somebody sees that? When a breeder's sitting with 10 pups that they're looking to sell, and somebody turns up with a big wad of cash in their hand, and again, I'm not bashing breeders, I'll save that for another time. I can take that money just now and I can just say that I've ticked the box. Okay, so do we have photocopies? Do we have records? Then who checks those records? Okay, and because breeding's not licensed, then where's the sanction for that? The person can just turn around and say, that wasn't me, nothing to do with me, don't know anything about it. Okay, now I'm going to just pause there for a second before we talk about licensing and give you another story about this. Okay, I do some work for a breed-specific legislation charity, so I do expert witness for court for dog bites, and I've done several, and to my knowledge, not one of my dogs has been put to sleep yet. Okay, fingers crossed. Okay, if I can keep that up, I would be delighted at 100%. Okay, now, one of the cases when we were talking about, with the charity members who were talking about it, okay, this guy who was, the word that we would use in Glasgow is wide, okay, street smart, fully aware of how the system works, and again in that kind of, I don't really need to follow societal rules, low economy demographic, okay, alright, so that type of person, okay, that kind of, what we might charitably call like a scallywag or a scoundrel, okay, but not a scoundrel, not a particularly nice person. So he lived in this housing estate, and he had a big dog, and I'll not tell you the breed of the dog, okay, this big brown dog. The dog was microchipped, okay, the dog bit several people, the police were then called, and in the interim from the police arriving, from the dog bites to the police arriving, the guy told his cousin to come and get the dog, and the cousin took the dog away, okay. The guy then turned around and said, dog ran away. Yep, don't know about it. So he then was, as far as I know, along the lines of taken to court, banned for holding a dog for 6 months or whatever, okay, not allowed to hold the dog, and that dog there was a destruction order placed on that dog, but they didn't know where the dog was, and no way how to find out where it was, because they can't compel him to tell them where the dog was, and his statement is the dog has run away, but the cousin had the dog. 6 months later, his order has expired, he's now able to own a dog again. He brings the dog back, and the police turn back up at his door. They haven't scanned the dog, so they don't have the microchip number from the first place. And when the police say that they're here to seize the dog, he says it's not the same dog. Okay, so that's how difficult this stuff is. All right. One of the things that I say to my clients if they're involved in dog bite incidents is that you shut your mouth and you go and see your lawyer. Okay, because that's what the law allows you to do. So the law is there to protect. In a democracy, it's the whole better that 10 guilty men go free than one free person is convicted, one innocent person is convicted. I still believe that. It's hard when you're dealing with criminality, as I was in my previous job. But your family member who has never been in bother with his life doesn't deserve to be fitted up by anything. And because of that, because we have that burden of proof on the state, it means that people who have done bad things get off. Okay, but that's the price that we pay for living in a democracy. All right. Okay, so we've then got that, going back to that licensing and compulsory sign-up. Okay, who would run those courses? What would the standard would be, and who would decide who gets the license? Okay, so you see how we've got all those things again getting in the way. All right, challenging, isn't it? Everything about this is challenging. Okay, and I'll look at how we try and do something about it, actually do something about it on a personal basis in a minute. Okay, so my opinion in this will be, I love these types of dogs. Okay, I've had these dogs for 20 years. I had a Neapolitan Mastiff, I had a Dogs of Bordeaux, I love Staffordshire Bull Terriers and Bull Terriers, and Logan, a big American Bulldog type dog. Okay, I love these types of dogs. They're my type of dog. I really, really, really like them. I don't think that we should have XL Bullies in society. I don't even think we should have Pit Bulls in society. Okay, and the reason for that is because the dog's always going to pay the price for that. Okay, I'll be getting another guest on at some point in the future, and we'll be talking about breeding pet dogs for pet homes. We breed dogs entirely for the wrong reasons, and the XL Bully is a prime example of that. It is an issue that half the fatalities last year were caused by these dogs. When people say that it's not the dog, it's the owner, that's clearly not the case. 3 things make up behaviour: current conditions, okay, the dog, the moment by moment conditions that the dog finds themselves in, the learning history, okay, what the dog has learned works and doesn't work previously, and their genetics. All right, and the genetic element with XL Bullies is what's causing these, plus the learning history and their the current conditions. Okay, there's a great book by he was an assistant chief constable. It's called Conviction by John Carnahan. I think I've mentioned this before in the podcast. And he talks about how we resolved recreational violence in the west of Scotland in the early noughties through a multi-agency approach, looking at dealing with knife crime and violence amongst young men as a public health issue and not a criminal justice issue. And as a result of that work and a few other societal factors, it's not the same as it used to be. Just not the same. Okay, Glasgow now. I grew up in East Kilbride, which is about 10 miles south of the city centre, is a big town. But Glasgow and the surrounding towns now are nothing like what they were in the 80s and 90s as far as violence amongst young men is. Nothing like it. I mean, nothing like it at all. Okay. My son's 22 years old, and it has never been on his radar, where it was on my radar since I was 13 years old, having to keep myself safe, fought around this recreational violence, so that you would just get jumped and your head kicked in for no reason, just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still happens, but again, happens nowhere near the way that it used to be. Okay. All right. So he looks at that, and he talks about education, housing, social work, and all the rest of it. So if we look at that in relation to our XL Bullies, what type of people are getting those dogs? Okay, what type of people are drawn to those dogs? And not everybody, before everybody starts falling out with me, okay? I am not one of those people, and I love these dogs. I'm not one of the head cases. I love my dogs. I love my big bull breeds. Love them. Got a good friend, and she had an American Bulldog. Hugo lived till he was 16. Sarah's a nurse. and has done her master's degree and is a phenom of a human being, and a genuinely kind, wonderful person. Her dad is a retired cop, and the two of them looked after this amazing dog for 15 years. They are not those type of people, okay? They just happen to adopt this dog, okay? So people are drawn to these types of dogs, but not everybody that is drawn to these types of dogs are these types of people, okay? They like the big dog. They like to walk down the street, look at me, check me with my big massive dog, look how tough I am. I can wrangle this dog, and that shows who I am as a man and as a human being in this world. Look at how much control and power I've got. Okay, so that goes into the current conditions. Okay, then you've got, if you think of that tough guy, idiot mindset, how are they rearing their dog? Okay, so I've got a puppy just now, one of the kind of strong working type dogs, and when the family picked this dog up, they were told by the breeder that you had to completely dominate these dogs at all time. Everything was done by shouting at the dog, leave it, pinning the dog down by the neck, holding the dog down if they'd done something, in quotes, wrong, at 8 weeks old, when the dog doesn't know anything, scruffing the dog, shaking them, okay, prong collars, all these horrible corrections rather than actually teaching the dog what to do, okay? So if that's how some breeders are acting, and then you get people who buy into that mindset, with that combination of genetics that these dogs have got, and they do have them, okay, we know statistically that they have them, because we're not seeing these types of behaviours in other types of dogs, okay? We get this combination, this horrible combination, which leads to these 8 fatalities last year. Okay, alright. So, abuse, untrained, neglected, poor learning, poor teaching, poor husbandry, okay, poor nutrition, poor living standards, and all that goes into the pot. Okay. Now, the other legislation says that the dogs have got to be muzzled and leashed while they're outdoors. That's what the current legislation says. So what about indoors? What about visitors come into the house? Okay, is there legislation, and then who would enforce that? Are the police going to come into take statements? I go into a house, your joiner comes in, goes into your house, and you get an XL bully, and it's in your own house, and the dog's not muzzled or is wandering around the room. Okay, so you see how, again, we've got the individual's rights, the individual, okay, our personal freedoms, living in a democracy without constant horrible state intervention, which is right. Yeah, okay, we should be free to go about our business most of the time without the state surveilling what we're doing and telling us what to do, versus the protections that were offered, that the person has offered, the visitor has offered. Okay. Now, just lastly, before we finish up on that, and then we'll talk about what we do. We get a dog license. Okay. Do the police do spot checks on that? Do they walk down the street and do spot checks on people? Do they just stop you? You're walking down the street and they just stop you and ask for your details. So you see how we can start getting back into that's starting to creep more into an authoritarian state, isn't it? Okay, now, is that all dogs? Is that all just these types of dogs? So, your 80-year-old neighbour who's walking down the street with her toy poodle, did the police stop and search, not stop and search her, do they stop and require that she provides her dog licence? Right? That's ridiculous, isn't it? But there's going to be some point where it's not ridiculous. Okay, you get the band pot, the head case, walking down the street with a big dog. People say, yeah, he should have to his licence. So they're making judgments on the appearance of the dog and the appearance of the person. Okay, and then that will determine on whether or not they should stop that person or not, and when it's ridiculous and when it's not ridiculous. Okay, so 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I used to shave my head. I used to have a really cropped crew cut, no beard. And if I walked down these streets with these dogs, people could say he's a thug, but I wasn't a thug. Okay, I think I'm quite a nice fella. Okay, most of the time, right? Certainly wasn't a thug, but I might fit that profile physically. In which case, we're now discriminating against people, which we're and living in a free and democratic society we shouldn't be aiming for. Okay. So you see how there's a whole bunch of problems there for all these solutions, okay, or all these suggestions rather, and how we implement them, okay. And given that those are my arguments against all of those things, and I said at the top of the hour, I don't have solutions for this on a societal level. The solutions for this come on an individual level, okay. So we take personal responsibility for our actions and our dog's actions. Okay, you train your dog well, you educate yourself, you learn about canine body language yourself, you treat your dog well, you treat your spouse well, your kids well, so you educate them properly, you interact well with the public kindly and putting boundaries in place at the same time, which is challenging. We advocate for your own dog. Okay, so if you've got a big dog and your big dog is nervous and people want to come in, advocate for your dog. You heard me if you've listened to the podcast I did a few weeks ago on Stoic principles in dog training. Take control of what you can take control of. Okay, we can't do everything, but we must do everything which we can. Okay, and it's taking personal responsibility as much as we can on a moment by moment basis. When we're tired, when we're hungry, when we can't be bothered, when your dog is annoying you, and on and on and on. Okay, because we owe it to our dogs, we owe it to each other. Okay, and we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to society. That's each other, I suppose, isn't it? Or all of it, actually. Okay, if you then see people with their dog is having a hard time, okay, just give them space, move away. Don't let your ego get in the way of, I should be able to walk down the street on my own. That person's having a hard time, just give them some space and move away from them, okay. Most dog bites, in fact, I'd be hard pushed to give you an example, or for you to give me an example where the dog bite is not avoidable. Dog bites are not are avoidable, okay. They are avoidable if we educate ourselves and think and be present and get off our phones and think of where we are in the moment and try and just be present. And it's challenging. It's really, really, really challenging. Okay, so that's my thoughts on this. All right, not a really nice topic to cover, but I think it's an important one. Something needs to change. If you've got ideas of how to take into consideration what I've said and then start building some things around that, if that, not that I'm arrogant that I've got that these are just my thoughts, and you can present that to your MP or your counsellor, and say these are the types of things, or we can build that within our own community, so you share resources about positive reinforcement based dog training. You see something that's good, or the information that's good, and you can see somebody who's struggling and say, this helped me, can I share that with you? Okay, so we can take responsibility to throw those ripples, or to make those ripples. And I'll leave you with that story about the two people walking along the shore. They're walking along the sand, and there's all these starfish washed up, and there's thousands of them. Thousands of these starfish have washed up onto the shore, and one of the people start taking them and throwing them back into the water, and they throw in another one, and then another one, and another one, but there's still thousands left. And the person says to them, surely you can't be putting all of them back in. He says, so what point is it? And he picks one up and he throws it in, and he says, there's a point to that one. I made a difference to that one. So we can make a difference, and if everybody does these little things, then we make big societal changes. Okay, and that's not doom and gloom. That's not to say that we can't resolve this. We're smart enough, okay, smart enough, kind enough, good enough that we can resolve this and we can stop these things from happening. Okay, much love to you. Catch you in the next episode.